Check 1, 2. Check, check. Check 1, 2. Check, check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay.
Yeah, I think we have everybody here, so we'll go ahead and call the Property and Facilities Committee meeting, the Board of Regents, State of Iowa, to order. Please note who's in attendance. Our first item on our agenda, the minutes of the April 18th, 2019 committee meeting. Are there any additions or corrections or changes there? Okay, hearing none, those will stand approved. Register of University of Iowa Capital Improvement Business Transactions. Rod Leonards, please.
Thank you, Regent Dokovich, committee members. The University of Iowa has 4 projects for your consideration, and then David Ketch will cover one more property sale later in the agenda. The 4 projects are these. I'll describe them and invite questions either during or after. First is on the main campus, our Campus Recreation and Wellness Center in its 10th year. This is a project that would be a 7 air handler unit replacement to maintain, as it says, maintain temperature and humidity in all of the pool areas in the aquatic center for this project. The original design of this project included a proprietary air handling system called Pool Pack. This was a system that was being used in a lot of similar facilities throughout the country, and ours and others have found that over time, with the corrosive nature of the aquatic centers, these have not held up well. We've had increasing both care and maintenance needs on them. And after evaluation of a best long-term solution for care of those important spaces, which cannot generally afford downtime because they're very event-oriented, both for Big Ten and NCAA swimming and diving competitions, but also major, due to the quality of that aquatic center, major both regional and national club swimming events and championships. And as such, we're taking time before the seasons start to advance this maintenance-based replacement that would be funded by a combination of recreation renewal and replacement funds and athletic department gifts and income. This is a permission to proceed with planning, so there isn't a specific dollar amount, but estimated at and communicated to you as a $5 to $6 million effort for 7 air handling units occupying the air and the air quality of a major portion of the building, as well as pipes, pumping systems, and controls that are associated with those units. The last 3 projects we have are UIHC projects. The first of those in the Pomerantz Family Pavilion expansion of infusion. This is on the clinical cancer level 4. This would take 6,000 square feet on that area that is being repurposed for 12 new cancer infusion beds and chairs and support spaces that do include nurses' stations, housekeeping, and other support elements related to the Pomerantz Center, Pomerantz Family Pavilion. The need for these cancer infusion beds is increasing with the aging population and increased cancer incidence, and is something that has been needed for some time and will advance the care of our patients at UIHC. This project is a advancement of schematic design, project description, and budget at $3.5 million to be funded by University Hospital building usage funds. The scheduling for that project, we would begin construction in this fall, 2019, and conclude that construction next summer. The second project for UIHC, our third project, is modification of the on-site central sterilization services. This actually takes place in a number of locations, in 5 buildings, in 8 locations within the UIHC complex. and is in tandem with the now under construction and board approved off-site central sterilization services at the Oakdale campus. And as we time these projects, this will allow us to decommission a lot of the equipment and the things that were needed within UIHC when all of that was happening on site, and then shifts to more of a receiving, distribution, and storage function within each of those spaces. And so individually they're minor renovations, but we are, for the purposes of the board, we are combining all of them to a project that would be $2.4 million, again supported by hospital usage funds. And the schedule for that project will start this summer and conclude roughly a year next summer, 2020, under 2 construction contracts based on locations and types of work. The fourth and final project in the Roy J. Carver Pavilion is a floor replacement project that has been planned for some time, and at the life's end of the flooring in that area. This represents a main entrance to the UIHC complex. It includes some other appointments that include glass and walls within the entry area for purposes of maintaining and minimizing contamination and airflow, cold airflow into that area. Additionally, while a lot of that is carpeted today, the standard for those areas is hard flooring, and so we're modernizing as well as caring for access and welcoming environments for the patients that come to the complex. That project, a $3.2 million project, usage funds to fund that project, and similar to the other 2, this is a project that would take roughly 1 year. Fall 2019, we'll start construction, finishing next summer. And there are some associated floor plans to give you a sense for the scale of the flooring and that entry area for that project, and some renderings to give you a sense for the space. Those are the 4 projects the University of Iowa has. Be glad to take any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Rod. Excuse me. Thank you, Rod. Any questions, comments? Okay, hearing none, we'll recommend those to the full board. Thank you very much, Rod.
Thank you.
Register of Iowa State University Capital Improvement Business Transactions. Pam Kane, please.
Thank you, Regent Dokovich. Iowa State University has 3 different projects for your approval. One is utility power plant station with power improvements for permission to proceed with planning. The second one is the Curtis Farm Feed Mill and Grain Science Complex for project description and budgets approval. And the third one is the Poultry and Teaching and Research Building, a revised budget for approval. I'll start with the utilities. Wanted to let you know that Iowa State built its first utility plant designed as a cogeneration, and these improvements are to assist with that cogeneration. So there's some substations and equipment here that need to be replaced there. And we've been doing this over time, and so this also provides a need for redundancy within the power plants. And the project is between $14 and $16 million. The second project is the Feed Mill and Grain Science Complex, which is in support of the university's mission and vision of putting science and technology to work for students' education and training needed by Iowa and the nation's agricultural industries, and creating the skilled, competent employees able to fill the existing employment gap in the feed and grain industries. This project of $21 million is been supported $16.5 million by 5 corporations. So they have provided, and that would be CPM just recently last month, Kent Corporation, the Iowa Corn Promotion Board, and Sukup Manufacturing. So, and the schematic design booklet is there if you have any questions for that also. The last project is the Poultry Farm Teaching and Research, and it's for additional space. If you believe it or not, that turkeys don't get along with chicken very well, and so this is an increased project budget to add 2 new buildings to the poultry farm. The poultry farm that you approved before is 1 major building, and this would provide 2 additional buildings for turkey research. And then when it's not being used for turkey research, we can clean it out and then use it for chicken research. So, but that project increase is a little over $1 million. Be pleased to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Pam. Is there any questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, we will recommend those to the full board. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you.
Item D, University of Iowa proposed property sale, the Iowa Center for Higher Education, the AIB campus. David, please.
Thank you, Regent Dakovich. We're here seeking approval of the purchase agreement for the Iowa Center for Higher Education campus in Des Moines. Following a rigorous process to secure the highest bids, including a formal RFP process to select an experienced commercial realtor in the Des Moines area, the university received numerous offers. The 6 highest were asked to further refine their bids and submit best and final offers, which occurred approximately 45 days ago. After reviewing the bids, the university has entered into a purchase agreement with the village at Grays Lake for $7.5 million. We're still in the contingency and due diligence period on behalf of the buyer, but assuming all contingencies are released later this month, we anticipate closing on the transaction sometime later this summer. The proceeds will follow the gift agreement that was originally entered into by the university and the AIB board, and we'll follow that, and it'll be divided based on the areas of campus that were sold into various scholarship funds. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, David. Any questions or comments on that? Okay. Yeah, I'd like to applaud you guys on that. That's a very specialized piece of property. You did a good job on it.
Thank you.
So, anything else? Okay, we'll recommend that to the full board. Thank you. Lease with the ISU Research Park. Back to Pam.
All right, thank you, Regent Dakovich. This is a lease that we're entering into with Iowa State Research Park because we're wanting them to lease the facility because that's what they do for corporations. And this particular location, the Beacon in Nevada, Iowa, is housed the Iowa Energy Center and was operated by that. But there's a current tenant, which is Frontline, who has been operating that part of the facility for quite a while. But we have an Iowa State researcher that wants to use Frontline for the next 2 years for their research project to develop a modular unit to process bio-based products in the field. And it would be using the entire complex in Nevada to do that with. And so we're wanting to lease it to Iowa State Research Park so they can further it. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Okay. Any questions, comments on that lease? Okay, hearing none, we will recommend that to the full board. Thank you. Lease with AmeriCorps in Vinton. John.
Thank you, Regent Dakovich. The board office is requesting board approval to sign a new lease with the federal government's AmeriCorps at the Iowa Braille and Sight Saving School. AmeriCorps has been leasing 60% of that campus for the last 11 years. The lease would be for another 10. The base rent is $8.09 per square foot or $928,000 per year. It would be key to finalizing the separate negotiations with the city of Vinton for them to be the new owners of the property. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, questions or comments on that lease? Okay, thank you. Hearing none, we will recommend that one to the full board. Is there any other business to come before the Property and Facilities Committee? Okay, hearing none, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. All right. Now, are there any questions or edits that may need to be made to the minutes as written? Hearing none, the committee will consider them approved by the General Counsel. And agenda item 2 is the investment and cash management report for the quarter ended March 31st, 2019. And I want to recognize Marquette Managing Partner Dave Smith to make a presentation on that.
Good afternoon, everyone. So as we've done in the past, we have a presentation that illustrates some of the events, and all of this material is as of 3/31/2018, and I think we can all acknowledge that there's been a significant amount of market-related activity since the 31st. So please recognize that this data is slightly stale and we've seen a lot of volatility. But the first quarter was by and large very, very good, contrasted with the fourth quarter where we saw one of the largest sell-offs in December ever. So we have some very positive news to report through the end of the first quarter. Now, the way that we've structured these presentations in the past, we have a brief market environment update that helps to explain and helps us to understand why the portfolios have performed the way that they have over the course of the first 3 months of the year. I'd also like to point out and just remind everyone that we have 5 portfolios under our care, 2 operating portfolios for both schools, a diversified intermediate operating portfolio, and then a long-term pool of capital. Each of those have different risk and return characteristics, different functions, different purposes. So to start out with, the overall economic review is still relatively healthy. We saw very strong 1Q GDP growth revised upward from this number from 2.3 to 3.1%. The unemployment rate is still among historically low levels. Millions and millions of Americans are back to work, and that is certainly driving the economy forward. Inflation remains muted. Inflation has not been a concern really since the depths of the financial crisis over a decade ago. And then the print here, the U.S. and China tariffs have made progress. Well, obviously we understand that that has significantly stalled, and that about face has dramatically increased volatility really since sometime in mid-May. So we've seen a few things occur since the printing of this material. One, renewed concerns around trade tariffs, and of course tariffs with Mexico has recently been introduced. And then the Fed, just as recently as yesterday, made it clear that they may react favorably to potential slowdown in global growth by cutting rates for the first time in quite a long time. We saw 9 rate hikes since December of 15. We could very much be seeing sometime as early as June or September a cut in rate hikes, and markets have reacted very favorably to that news. With respect to fixed income, and we decouple this report by asset class, when we looked at this material a quarter ago, fixed income, core fixed income had a return of 0. It's very, very unusual to see bonds produce a flat or negative number, especially when equities sell off. Well, we've seen a rebound in equities, we've seen a rebound in credit, and all of that is evident here. Core bonds at the very top over the quarter, up almost 3%, and then more importantly, or more interestingly, long-term credit high-yield bonds up in the neighborhood of almost 8%. Credit high yield tends to mirror U.S. equities, and we have allocations to all of these asset classes in the portfolio. Further to the comments about the Fed funds, we've seen 9 rate hikes from basically 0 to almost 2.25% since December of 2015. The expectation now, and this is based on Fed funds futures trading, there is a likelihood of a 15% rate hike, cut in June and perhaps one in September. And all of this tends to change on a day-by-day basis, but Chairman Powell made it very clear that the Fed is prepared to react in the event that there's a slowdown. Lower interest rates tends to react or allow equities to react favorably. So the indication, at least at the time of this printing, was that we will see a cut in 2019. One of the other big challenges, or one of the other big stories that we continue to follow, is the concept of an inverted yield curve. An inverted yield curve can signify a recession. That's when the long end or short end rates are higher than long-term rates. Now, forward markets, as of 3/31, as evidenced by every single line here, suggests that we will see a normalized yield curve. So based on forward markets, the likelihood of an inverted yield curve does not persist, suggesting that the likelihood of a recession could be somewhat suppressed. Now, inflation target still shy of 2%. That 2% number is the bogey that the Fed tries to keep in check. The Fed, through the use of interest rates, tries to improve or increase GDP and keep inflation in check. We've seen it's been very challenging for inflation to eclipse 2%, even with a very low interest rate environment. So this is the Fed target. We haven't eclipsed that 2% inflation rate, and it's unlikely that that will occur anytime soon. Now, when we talk about higher rates, there is a benefit. Higher yield in the fixed income portion of the portfolio, and for the better part of the last 2 decades, in the last decade in particular, yields on core fixed income have been very, very low, somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3%. That places a huge drag on potential earning when we rely on fixed income to generate return. So we've seen allocation to bonds come down over the years. Now, by contrast, if we look at the gold dots on the far right-hand side in the 80s and the early 80s, yields on government bonds, as an example, were much, much higher. So we see a stark contrast in the yields from bonds over that period. We've also experienced a prolonged bull market in fixed income as yields have come down and bond prices have increased. U.S. equity, best quarter since 1998, so very strong returns from U.S. equity in particular. If we look at the 3-month column, every single sub-asset class posted a return in double digits. More importantly, if we look over the last 10 years on an annualized basis, where we're totally beyond the impact of the financial crisis, returns for U.S. equity, large cap, mid cap, small cap, across core, value, and growth are in the mid-teens. We have benefited significantly from quantitative easing. Equity holders, equity markets have seen one of the longest rally. In fact, it's the longest rally ever, as evidenced on this next page. We eclipsed the mark for the longest bull market sometime in August, and we are now well beyond the 10-year anniversary of the bull market that started March 9th, 2009. It is important to point out that as disappointing or as discouraging as market sell-offs can be, normally that period of dislocation is short-lived. We see significant rebounds across almost every single instance dating back to the financial crisis, where we saw equities sell off by 55%, followed by one of the largest rebounds. More recently, the global growth slowdown perceived in December or fourth quarter 2018, we saw a sell-off followed by a very healthy rally. Now that's pulled back a little bit, but the point here is that while disappointing, we can expect, as evidenced throughout history, of equity market rebounds. Active managers versus passive managers. This is an ongoing dialogue among institutional and retail investors in the best way to access markets. As evidenced by this slide here, year to date in 2018, active managers have struggled to outperform their benchmark with the exception of large cap growth and small cap growth. We have heavy allocations to index management or passive management in the portfolios already. It is a great way to draw down costs, but there is always room to think about ways to access beta, pay lower fees. The illustration on slide 13 is intended to illustrate that during periods of Fed pause or when the Fed is not taking any action, that in general markets react favorably. Markets, we saw a long period between rate hikes up until 2015 when we saw the first rate hike. We did see a hike in December of 15, followed by, or the next one was not followed until a year later. And during that time, the equity markets returned almost 10%. In every single instance, with the exception of the dot-com collapse in the early part of the 2000s, periods between the Fed activity resulted in favorable equity returns. Non-U.S. equity has been accretive to portfolios as well, though not to the same magnitude. Non-U.S. equity has returned healthy returns, high single digits, low double digits over a 3-month and 10-year time horizon, accretive to the portfolio, but non-U.S. equities have trailed U.S. equity counterparts significantly over almost every single time period. When we think about non-U.S. equity markets, the same trends from a central bank perspective hold true. We are seeing, in general, central banks pausing their tightening cycle as the perception around global growth slowdown tends to linger. However, if we look at labor markets, unemployment rate, wage expansion, those are favorable trends. Unemployment levels have come down considerably since the financial crisis in the U.S. and outside of the U.S., and wages are starting to expand. All of that creates a very healthy economic experience and drives GDP growth. And then lastly, China has taken steps to stimulate its economy by reducing the amount that's required to be held in reserve. If banks are holding less in reserve, they are lending more, they are spending more, and that's a catalyst for economic growth in Chinese markets. Asset class returns, and these are all the asset classes that are in the 5 portfolios that are under our collective care. When we looked at this chart a quarter ago, every single asset class, with the exception of real estate, was in negative territory. Real estate was the only portfolio ballast in 2018, returning somewhere in the neighborhood of 7.5%. By contrast, we have seen very healthy returns, especially among U.S. equity managers in the first quarter. Just underscores the volatility and what can happen from one quarter to the next. I'll pause there with any questions about economic review before we turn to the portfolios.
Any questions? On your slide on the headwinds for active managers, I take that to mean that you're in general a fan of index investing.
We are.
Thanks. Any other questions? Go ahead.
So the performance review, again, is intended to be a very high-level review of overall asset allocation, portfolio performance. We dig much deeper with the universities and individual committee meetings. This is intended to be the highest level overview. So from start to finish, we will look at the most conservative portfolios first, the most aggressive portfolios last, and just keep in mind that each portfolio has a very specific risk-return objective. So the most conservative are the operating portfolios, as evidenced on this slide. Very high allocations to fixed income. Fixed income drives yield, fixed income exhibits lower volatility, and we do have well-diversified portfolios of fixed income that capture higher increments of yield. But fixed income is going to be one of the safest asset classes. And then we have small allocations to return-seeking asset classes, equities, real estate, and then liquidity portfolios. The target return objective is approximately 3%, and over the 5-year time horizon, we are right on target net of fees. Some tracking over the 1-year time horizon due to one manager underperformance, but over a longer term, we are right where we need to be. The Iowa State operating portfolio has the exact same asset allocation. There can be some differences from quarter to quarter based on cash flows, but generally we try to stick to these asset allocations as closely as possible at all times. And the results are very, very similar. Over the long term, we are right at 3%, 3-year time horizon, 3.6% net of fees. So both of these portfolios are behaving as we would expect given the risk-return objectives and investment constraints of each portfolio. The University of Iowa Diversified Intermediate Term portfolio takes on slightly more risk, has a slightly higher return objective of approximately 4%, and we can see that there are modestly higher allocations to return-seeking assets, equities, real estate, and a lower allocation to liquidity profile. And as a result, we are still, again, we have a slightly higher return. Not quite to that 4% mark over a 5-year period, but over a 3-year time horizon, we are right on track. And then lastly, the endowment portfolios. These are the most aggressive. These have a very long-term time horizon, the most aggressive return, the most aggressive capability or ability to take risk. And what stands out here is the allocation to private markets. Private markets are going to drive return, very long-term time horizon. We also have healthier allocations to public equities, lower allocation to fixed income. And not surprisingly, the return over a long-term time horizon is much higher, over 9% over the last 3 years and around 6.5% over a 5-year time horizon, driven almost entirely by higher allocations to U.S. public equity, non-U.S. public equity, private equity. And the same is true for the Iowa State Endowment, the exact same target allocation, some differences attributable to cash flows, and the results are very similar, over 9% over a 3-year time horizon and 6.6 over a 5-year time horizon. So generally speaking, the portfolios are behaving as we would expect. We have specific risk return profiles for each. We work hard to try to manage fees through indexing, using active management where we think it's most appropriate, and we've been on track.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Are there any questions on this portion of the presentation? All right. Is there any other business to come before the committee? Then the Investment and Finance Committee is now adjourned.
Tanya and John are going to come up and say a few things when we get to it.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. They can sit there.
That was wimpy. The meeting of the Academic Affairs Committee will call to order. And the first item is roll call. And I'd like to, first of all, introduce the new vice chair of the committee is Jim Lindenmeyer. And Jim, are you here?
I am.
Provost Sakuri.
Here. Here.
Jonathan Wickard.
Present.
Provost Jim Walpart.
Present.
Chief Academic Officer Rachel Boone.
Present.
And Regent Butker is present. We have a quorum. The first item of business is approval of the minutes. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, they'll be approved as presented. We have a short agenda today, but there are, the first item is the request for a name change at Iowa State University. So, Provost Wickard, will you do that?
Yes, thank you, Regent Butker. I'll take these two items together. We offer 2 master's degrees in the area of information assurance. The first one under item A is a Master of Engineering degree, which is entirely course-based and is a terminal degree intended for working professionals. And the second is a Master of Science degree, which also includes a research project component for students interested in that experience or as a gateway to the PhD program. Both degrees are in an area called information assurance. And that's sort of a legacy term for cybersecurity. The term information assurance originated in the Department of Defense, and indeed we have a research center, which is a NSA Center of Excellence in the area of information assurance. But the terminology has just become obsolete. The modern terminology that students and most employers understand is cybersecurity engineering. So with the deployment of our new cybersecurity undergraduate engineering degree in the fall, we want to take this opportunity to rename and essentially rebrand the corresponding graduate programs and basically just change the name from information assurance to cybersecurity.
Thank you, Provost. I think it's interesting when I checked into the hotel the other night, I met and visited with some parents who were dropping their student for orientation in the cybersecurity program. So that was kind of fun. I said, oh, we're renaming the master's level. So are there any questions, other questions or comments?
It's a great change.
On that? Okay. Then if there's no objections, the Academic Affairs Committee will recommend approval of the program name change to request to Master of Engineering in Cybersecurity and Master of Science in Cybersecurity. Thank you. Next, at this time, Provost Curry will present a request for the
Sure,
program
so
department.
we have a team effort today, so I'll invite both team members up, who in turn, Tanya Udenholman, will talk about the program name change for the BS in Science Education, and then John will follow with the next name change, and then I'll bring it home with the last two.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We are requesting approval to change the name of the Bachelor of Science in Science Education to the Bachelor of Science in Science Studies within the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. So currently, the name Science Education has contributed to confusion among students, faculty, and staff. In fact, there have been instances where students have wrongly assumed that admission to the BS in Science Education has also provided admission to the teacher education program, which it does not. So in addition, the new name will resolve confusion between the newly approved Bachelor of Arts in Science Education offered by the College of Education, which is part of the teacher education program but has different curricula. Under the new name, Science Studies, this major will still serve the same categories of students while more accurately representing the course content, which includes 36 to 45 credit hours in the sciences from the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences and 9 to 12 credits in applications of science and education from the College of Education. And it had approval from the Council of Provosts.
Any questions or comments? Okay. Do you want to
Thank you.
come up and do the next one?
Yes, thank you, Regent Becker. This is probably the most straightforward proposal that I've ever brought forward to this group. This is a request for a name change in our Master of Fine Arts program, currently in Comparative Literature Translation, to Master of Fine Arts in Literary Translation. This program is housed in our Division of World Languages, Literatures, and Cultures in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. Over the last 6 years or so, on our campus, we have terminated the bachelor's, the master's, and the PhD program in comparative literature. The last standing program is our MFA program in comparative literature translation, which is really a misnomer nowadays compared to the previous years, both on our campus and internationally. Literary translation is the title that is actually used throughout this discipline. It connects very well to the rest of our writing programs on campus, in particular connection to our internationally known international writing program. They have great strengths together. It's strictly a name change. There's no change in curriculum, faculty participation, or other resource issues related to the program, and we ask for your permission to change the name.
Are there any questions or comments? I love these big controversial issues. So then, if there are no objections, the Academic Affairs Committee will recommend approval of the program name changes to Bachelor of Science in Science Studies and Master of Fine Arts in Literary Translation. We will also recommend approval of oh, yeah, right.
Oh, well, you
Yeah.
can do those two if you want to
We
finish
can
your
do those
sentence.
two.
Yeah, we have two requests for department name changes, extremely controversial. The first one is to change the name of the Department of Pharmacology to the Department of Neuroscience and Pharmacology in the Carver College of Medicine. This actually acknowledges the existing portfolio, around the academics and the research in there. About 80% of the faculty in that department have research portfolios in neuroscience. So this will actually enable the department to compete for center grants and recruit faculty and postdocs in this area. So it doesn't change anything except the name. I'm not sure I need to go into more chapter and verse on that one. The second one is to change the name of the Department of Sociology to the Department of Sociology and Criminology in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. And this actually reflects the addition of a major, a very popular major in criminology under the aegis of this department. you know, it will allow students to very easily find where this major is housed, because there's a lot of interest, and will help attract students interested in their graduate program in this area as well.
Great. Are there any questions or comments about this request? If not, I will add that to what I started to say before, and approval of the department name change to Department of Pharmacology and Neuroscience and the Department of Sociology and Criminology. Okay. That's really all the business we have, but I wanted to take this opportunity to publicly thank Interim Provost Sue Curry for her great service to the University of Iowa and to this committee. Your leadership and skills have been valuable, and it's been a total pleasure to work with you. So thank you very much, and we wish you well.
Thank you so much.
Go have some fun.
You're done with fun.
I'm done with fun, yeah. Apparently, my major contribution to the Council of Provosts
It's fun.
was humorous relief. Yeah.
That's always good.
No, I'm just kidding.
So the next meeting of this committee is scheduled for September 18th in Council Bluffs.
Rachel, do we need to approve the minutes?
We did.
What? We did,
Okay, thank you.
we got them by consent.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned.
Oh, no, she said by consensus, yeah, gotcha.
That's the new Sue Curry.
The new Sue Curry rule, that's right.
Love it.
The Student Affairs Committee together to order, and we have such a lengthy agenda here that I think I'll just have Jason take note of the attendees rather than making a roll call vote. We do have a new vice chair and a new regent member too that I don't think could be here for this session, but he's the new student member, Zach Least from Iowa State University. And with that, I'll call on Jason to make his report to the committee.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon. Disability support services have kind of been in the air lately. Over the last few months, the board office has gotten some requests for additional data on disability support services. And as you may have remembered at the Iowa City meeting, there were a number of comments and requests related to that topic. So to help address that, we are setting up for September, the September board meeting, to bring in the directors of the disability support offices from the 3 universities and give a comprehensive report on kind of the work they do and their kind of their day-to-day efforts. But to bridge that gap, we wanted to kind of spend just a very few minutes, and I promise only 3 slides, to talk about some of the data that we do have and to answer a question that has come up. I'm sorry.
Jason, I just got word we're going to have to take just recess for a 10-minute break.
Okay.
We've got an important agenda item for the board to take care of. We have to have our picture taken.
Sounds good.
We'll be right back.
All right.
We don't get those requests often, so we got to take advantage of it. Okay, thank you for that indulgence there. Jason, if you'd start all over again, please.
Yeah, no problem. Just, I guess, just to sum up from this point forward, the disability support services is the topic for today, and one of the big questions that we've been getting at the board office is why does the board not provide retention data and graduation data for students of disability support services? And it's a good question. The reason is we can't. There are a few kind of data black boxes on a college campus, and disability support services is one of them. This is because students have to first, in order to earn these, to get these services or accommodations, they have to be able to show any kind of like a medical need for the service, and then they have to self-identify and go to the support offices. In order to protect these students' privacy and also to kind of comply with FERPA and HIPAA rules, we need to make sure that those identities stay in those offices. So we've got registrars that know how our students are doing as far as retention and graduation rates, but they don't know the identities of students that are using these services. Service offices knows the identity of the students, but they don't have the other information. And so we've typically been unable to provide that data. Now there are ways around that, which would be essentially creating like a computer algorithm where you have a computer do the matching for you. It then matches the data, spits out the results, and so the human part only sees the aggregate data tables at the end of it. And that's something that's doable. It's just a matter of finding the IT resources to be able to put that sort of process together. It's like creating a data vending machine, and it's not terribly easy to do. I know, for example, the University of Iowa is working on doing that right now. Now, this isn't to say we don't have some kind of data. For over 20 years, the Regents office has been collecting data on basic disability support services. So I'm going to go over what we do have right now. So here are the trends showing the number of students that are using services and accommodations and the percent of the total student body that are using those services and accommodations. And as you can see, over the last 7 years, there's been a marked increase in the number of those students that are coming to the disability support service offices. This is good news in many ways because students are feeling comfortable coming and saying, I've got an issue, I need to have special help in some way. We've seen some of the national survey data, anywhere from 11 to 21% of a typical incoming class through these surveys so they have some kind of disability or some kind of need that will be met by one of these offices. So the fact that those students are now coming to us is great. However, this provides stress on the system. It's increased demand for those services. Now, these offices have traditionally supported students more with learning disabilities, mobility and sensory issues, or other things like ADHD. But as you can see in this slide, there have been a recent dramatic increases in the health and psychological service categories. Now, these increases have implications for our university beyond just these support service offices because complex physical and mental health disabilities can require universities to deal with hospitalizations, extended absences, and they can tax campus health and counseling service resources. And this final slide is going to show a kind of a breakdown of our services and accommodations that are provided. And you can see that the majority of them are for different kinds of testing or kind of access to classroom material areas, which you would expect. The one thing I do want to point out is the third highest category is other accommodations. And from an institutional research perspective, that's bad, because what that says to me is that our existing categories are not doing a very good job of kind of describing what some of the services are being offered, so they go into the other category. So we've seen this, and I've already contacted the directors of the disability support service offices, and we're going to be meeting in the next couple weeks to kind of talk through finding ways that we can better kind of align these descriptions and categories to what's being offered today, and so we can move that. There's always going to be another, but we don't want it to see it that high. And that's all I have as far as the data. Again, it's fairly small amounts of data that we do collect, and I will try to answer any questions you might have at this time.
Any questions for Jason? Regent Becker.
Thank you. Thank you for a great report, Jason. I was curious, the sign interpreters, are they lumped on their other accommodations? I don't see them in the chart.
They're not. It's just that they're not showing up in the pie chart. In order to, we weren't able to fit all the labels for the different slices of the pie chart. So they're there, but they're a separate color. They're just not labeled.
Okay, one of those other ones. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Jason? Jason, I have one. Would you care to pontificate on the reason for the spike in psychological and health requests?
Well, and that may be a good question just to pass over to the directors. I can point out the patterns, but I don't know as much of the reason for it. Now, if any of the vice presidents at the table would like to take the mic, I'm happy to turn it over to them.
Paul?
Good afternoon. Paula Knudsen with UNI. And I think there's multiple reasons. Jason had talked about the increase in numbers, and the good thing is that they're making it through the K-12 system with support and able to be successful, and therefore being able to go on to counseling. I think there's a lot of complex issues that probably go into the increase in the psychological, and I think that might be some generational. Students are coming to us as, especially, I'm sorry, I'm going to go with gender here. Females in particular are raised in very particular structured environments. They aren't getting the exposure that perhaps they did in my generation growing up, and that leads them to very precise kind of daily routines, and when those disruptions to those, that causes some increase in the psychological needs and dimensions of our students coming in. Females, by and large, tend to, when they have free time, the California Institute for Research has said, showing trends that women tend to volunteer, to give back in some way, whereas their male counterparts tend to do more relaxing things, and all of that kind of combines to increase psychological needs. And I think there's a general awareness that has happened as far as it's okay, which is a really good thing. It's okay to need help, and so therefore more of our students are coming to us already having seen mental health providers and on medication. And those are all good things, but it is changing pretty dramatically, the college environment.
Good afternoon. Melissa Shivers, University of Iowa. I just want to echo Paula's comments and talk a little bit about what we're trying to do to address specifically that issue at Iowa. We now have University Counseling Services partnering and working with Student Disability Services to even perhaps have a counselor or therapist situated within the Office of Student Disability Services, because there are so many intersections in terms of the student's abilities and needs, particularly as it relates to accommodation and the psychological factors or issues that they're facing.
Good afternoon, Martino Harmon, Iowa State. I would just echo my colleagues in saying that students in high school are utilizing these services. Years ago when I started in higher ed, there was more of a stigma about requesting these services, and over the years, that stigma is not nearly what it was. So students are utilizing services in high school, so they come to colleges, students and parents, anticipating and expecting the services to be available. So it's fairly common for students to come forward and say that they need this assistance. And it's consistent with our presentation a couple months ago about health and wellness services. It's a real expectation, and it's very much tied to academic success and academic performance. If we are unable to support the needs of the students, it has an impact on their ability to be successful in our institutions. So it has a direct connection.
Thank you for those thoughts, and I really want to thank you for your good work that you do every day too. It's more and more important to the success of our students, and we see it on the front pages every day, unfortunately. But so thank you for your work. Any other business before this committee? Hearing none, our next meeting will be September 18th in Council Bluffs, and hearing no other comments, we'll adjourn. Thank you.
Just FYI, I think we're going to try to start early here in a minute or two. The meeting of the Board of Regents, State of Iowa for June 5, 2019 will come to order. I will begin by calling the roll. Regent Butker.
Present.
Regent Barker.
Here.
Regent Bates.
Present.
Regent County.
Oops.
Present.
Regent Dakovich.
Present.
Regent Dunkel.
Present.
We'd like to welcome Regent Least.
Here.
Regent Lindemeyer.
Here.
Regent Richards is present. We have a quorum and the meeting can begin. First item is the consent agenda. Are there items board members would like to remove from the consent agenda for a separate vote? A motion and a second are required to approve and receive items on the consent agenda. Is there a motion?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
It was, you don't have Rachel. A motion by Regent Butker and a second by Regent County. Any discussion? We'll have a roll call vote. Regent Barker.
Yes.
Regent Bates.
Yes.
Regent Butker.
Yes.
Regent County.
Yes.
Regent Dakovich.
Yes.
Regent Dunkel.
Yes.
Regent Least.
Yes.
Regent Lindemeyer.
Yes.
Regent Richards votes yes. The motion is approved. At this time, I'd turn the meeting over to Regent Dunkel, who will run the Audit and Compliance Committee meeting.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This is the Audit and Compliance Committee meeting. And our first item is the minutes of the April 18th, 2019 meeting. You've all had a chance to look at them. Are there any corrections or questions to them? Do I have a motion and a second?
I'll move to pass the minutes.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Regent Bates and a second by Regent Butker. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Then the minutes are approved. Thank you. I'd like to recognize Chief Audit Executive Patrice Sayre for a report on the internal audit reports. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to share with you some of the work that the internal audit function has been doing since we last met. Since the April meeting, the internal audit team has completed 5 audit reports and 2 follow-up memos at the University of Iowa, 1 audit report and 1 follow-up memo at Iowa State University, and 1 follow-up at UNI. We are still down 1 auditor on the hospital side at the University of Iowa. We're down 1 auditor at Iowa State University and have a vacancy at UNI. We have hired 2 auditors at the University of Iowa. They're still in the onboarding stage. And just to remind you, our vacancies occurred back last September through December, so we're behind on our audit plan for the year, and I will more fully outline that when we meet in September. The first report I'd like to share with you today is the University of Iowa's Department of Public Safety Information Technology. This was a comprehensive audit that had 2 auditors doing the work as a team. The Department of Public Safety is responsible for emergency response at the university and has maintained its own IT infrastructure separate from the information technology services, meaning that public safety has its own Active Directory environment, firewall, multiple software systems, body and squad car cameras, 6 servers, and other technology devices. The audit scope looked at the technology infrastructure, security configurations, disaster recovery plans, systems log activity, and monitoring controls. We compared these issues with the university's own information technology services and the Federal Criminal Justice Information Services security policies. Highlighting a few of the audit discussions, we found IT roles and responsibilities were not clearly defined, resulting in some segregation of duty conflicts. There was lack of full technology support and a single point of failure. Essentially, one person was responsible for critical IT support, with a second person having limited support tasks. Neither person's job description included any mention of IT. The manager has agreed to work with ITS to implement the one IT model as appropriate. Infrastructure controls were not aligned with security best practices and ITS policies. By not receiving ITS services, critical intrusion detection and vulnerability scanning tools are not being used, nor is the Department of Public Safety using the enterprise-wide antivirus and anti-malware solution. The Assistant VP and Director of DPS will work with ITS CIO to address this. The Active Directory contains multiple weaknesses, which heightens the risk of unauthorized individuals gaining access to data. DPS has begun to address specific Active Directory security changes. Monitoring and logging. The Department of Public Safety systems are not monitored, audit logs are not reviewed, and security incident response plans do not exist. This increases the risk that unauthorized events will not be identified or managed appropriately. Again, management has determined that audit policies for servers have already been implemented, and they will work with ITS to identify alerts and a process for tracking unusual events. The Department of Public Safety is not aware of current system security settings, which increases the risk for non-compliance with university and criminal justice information services. Again, management will work with ITS. Sensitive data. DPS works with a number of vendors, and not all of those vendors have criminal justice information systems compliant addendums on file to ensure that sensitive data is appropriately protected. Management will work with security addendums. They believe they at one time existed in 2018 and need to be updated. Other areas for work include disaster recovery and backups, data retention and disposal, physical security and training, technology inventory, acquisitions, contracts, and SOC reports, change management, and institutional accounts. I want to state that while there are many IT issues to be worked on between the DPS director and the CIO, we found no evidence of a security breach or misuse of data. This was a complex audit, and addressing these findings will take time to see where these systems align. The use of a red dot for coding on this report is due to the criticality of the services and the multi-departmental collaboration it will require. At Iowa State University, I want to highlight the Employee International Travel Audit. The international travel is authorized for university business, which involves many components. To name a few, enrolling in basic and emergency medical coverage, security evacuation services, emergency travel assistance, destiny-specific safety and security information through the Cultural Insurance Services International. This is a vendor contracted and shared by all 3 Regents. Export control laws have to ensure that prohibited technology and related technical information is not violated. For instance, taking electronic devices, materials, and data out of the U.S. can require an export license. The purpose of this audit was to provide reasonable assurance that processes and internal controls are in place and functioning efficiently. Among the discussion items were registration of employee international travel. Employees are not required to electronically document plans to travel internationally in advance. Individual units may require registration or documentation, but it is not university-wide. Internal Audit believes registration will allow the Office of Research Integrity and the Office of Risk Management to aid traveler safety and export control compliance. Management responds that they believe the new improved service delivery teams, which start July 1 as the new Workday system goes live, will ensure these registrations occur without the individual needing to do so. Another issue, protection of export control data, devices, and software. Internal Audit believes the Office of Research Integrity should draft export control travel guidelines to supplement the existing ISU export control policy. These guidelines should include a requirement for loaner devices when traveling to high-risk destinations and where an employee's regular device contains sensitive data or software. Along with the Office of Research Integrity, Risk Management, Procurement, and ITS should work together to establish a university-wide loaner program. Management is going to work together to draft export control travel guidelines. They will work with the other named units to create a loaner program. Additionally, the Office of Research Integrity and the Office of Risk Management will work to identify travel to high-risk destinations and provide additional information to the traveler. Another issue, single online resource for employees traveling international. Audit recommends that a single resource providing necessary and useful information to employees traveling internationally should be created. Information is posted, but it's rather piecemeal. A consolidated site would help the traveler have the safest, most efficient trip possible. Management occurs and will create such a site. Issue, vendor security and performance assessment. CISI, the insurance vendor that was contracted for travel safety and evacuation, does not have a current vendor security assessment on file. This assessment helps to ensure that the disclosure of employee and institutional information does not occur. CISI was originally contracted back in 2012 and is currently on one-year extensions. Management agrees and will conduct the assessment shortly. Some other audit discussions included ensuring all appropriate parties are named in the crisis response plan and that a member of university leadership is named to plan and lead in the case of an extreme event. The Office of Research Integrity should proactively do an educational outreach to key target groups and individuals more likely to need to understand export control regs. CISI monthly invoices need to be reconciled to actual trip reconciliations and ISU travel, that's a software program, to ensure correct billing. Fly America Act compliance can result in portions of a federal award being disallowed if one leg of a multi-stop flight does not comply. Those charged with reviewing expenses need to understand those regs. When sampling international travel expenses, the Controller's Office should stratify the sample to ensure the highest cost travel expenses are more heavily tested. Management has responded positively to all recommendations. Successful implementation of the action plans will improve these processes and controls and make this travel more smooth. As to follow-ups, as I mentioned in the April meeting, the University of Iowa's Division of Student Life was closed that month, just days before the board meeting, and the official closeout report is available this month and in your packet. As to follow-up status, at the University of Iowa, the UIHC Durable Medical Equipment Audit is making progress. That one is still red. That is still red. There is now a signed contract with an outside consultant, and the retail space in the hospital is ready to go. The University of Iowa Telemedicine Audit is closed and will be presented at the September Audit and Compliance Committee meeting. And that completes my report.
Thanks, Patrice. Do we have any questions for her?
Yes, how much time do you think for addressing the issues at the public safety?
Many of these are going to take quite a long time. We try to do a date for every single discussion point. Some of these are out to January 2020. I'm not sure what the longest one is. July 2020. Again, these are two very detailed, very different systems that will have to decide where alignment is appropriate or where it's just not applicable. There may be some things that really don't belong in one IT. But I can tell you they've already started meeting.
That's good. Any other questions? Okay. Is there any other business to come before the committee? Hearing none, I'd like to make a motion that the Audit and Compliance Committee recommend that the board receive the presentations today, including the internal audit reports Patrice has. Do I have a second to my motion? Seconded by Regent Bates. Thank you. So the board is scheduled to take action on this motion at the September board meeting, and the Audit and Compliance Committee is now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Dunkel. Thank everyone for the presentation. Now I'd like to recognize Regent Bates, who will run the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics Committee meeting.
Okay. Thank you, President Richards. If all, are they here? Yeah, there they are. Yeah. Yeah. Hello, good afternoon. Okay. Item number 1 is the minutes of the April 18th, 2019 University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics Committee meeting. Are there any questions or corrections in those minutes? If not, do I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes? Moved by Regent Dunkel and seconded by Regent Butker. All those in favor say aye. The minutes are approved. Now I'll welcome Vice President for Medical Affairs and Dean of Carver College of Medicine, Dr. Brooks Jackson, and turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Regents. Good afternoon, and I'm very pleased to be here today and would like to introduce other members of the UI Healthcare team who are joining me. Associate Vice President and Chief Executive Officer for UI Hospitals and Clinics, Suresh Gunasekaran. Associate Vice President for Finance and UI Healthcare's Chief Financial Officer, Brad Hawes. And Professor of Obstetrics and Gynecology, Reproductive Endocrinology, and Infertility, Dr. Brad Van Voorhees. Following my brief opening remarks, our presentation today will include a high-level overview by Suresh of our vision for patient care at UI Healthcare, which includes an ambitious goal to be a top 20 hospital nationally. We hope this will give the board a better sense of the direction we are taking to build a system of excellent and integrated care for all Iowans. Suresh and Brad will also provide a report on UI Hospitals and Clinics' operational and financial performance through March. We remain laser-focused on our patients to ensure they receive care that is easier to access, that's safer, better, and more efficient, and you'll hear about some of the concrete ways in which we are doing just that. Following that, we will have a brief presentation by Dr. Van Voorhees, whose research focuses on the evaluation and treatment of the infertile couple, and who I'll introduce in more detail a little bit later. But first, I'd like to share with the board a few items of note. The Carver College of Medicine was proud to see 143 senior medical students graduate earlier this spring. This was a remarkably successful class, as the following key measures attest. There was a 98% initial pass rate for the graduating students on the United States Medical Licensing Exam Step 1 and Step 2, which represents the clinical knowledge portion of the USMLE exam process. The class of 2019 enjoyed the second highest USMLE scores the college has ever seen. And as I reported in April, but I think it bears repeating, our graduating students did very well in the National Resident Matching Program, which is the process that determines where graduates will continue their medical training. Among this year's graduates, 50 or 35% will remain in Iowa for their first year of postgraduate training, 33 or 23% of whom will train next year at UI hospitals and clinics. And I should note the number of Carver College of Medicine medical students staying in Iowa for residency increased 52% over last year. We trust you share the tremendous pride and enthusiasm for the success of these outstanding students, and we look forward to following their careers as they go out into the world to change medicine and change lives. One of the main reasons we are able to attract great students and launch them into successful careers in medicine is because we have a great faculty, great nurses, and many other great professionals all contributing to our tripartite mission of education, research, and patient care. And speaking of great nurses, I'm pleased to share that 12 of UI Healthcare's nursing specialists were recently honored as among the 100 great Iowa nurses. Congratulations to Molly Bauer, Amy Bowman, Heather Eastman, Rhonda Evans, Lisa Hughes, Seth Jackson, Julia Langen, Paula Ingalls, McHugh, Angela O'Toole, Gail Reynolds, Erin Springer, and Janice Tenner. This is a well-deserved honor for each of these 12 individuals to be recognized for their truly outstanding contributions to the field. We could not be more proud of the work they and all our nursing colleagues do to provide high-quality care for our patients and advance their profession. In other good news, I'm delighted to share that Becker's Healthcare recently named University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics, both among the 100 great hospitals in America and among the nation's 150 top places to work in healthcare. The top places to work honor highlights hospitals, health systems, and healthcare companies that promote diversity within the workforce, employee engagement, and professional growth. We know that our people are a valuable asset, our most valuable asset, and we are proud to provide the benefits and opportunities for employees that help them build successful careers. These included on the great hospitals list are recognized nationally for their excellence in clinical care, patient outcomes, and staff and physician satisfaction. These institutions are industry leaders that have achieved advanced accreditation and certification in several specialties. The list also includes industry innovators that have sparked trends in healthcare technology, hospital management, and patient satisfaction. So it's a great honor for us to be among the top 100. But we also know we have what it takes to achieve even greater heights of excellence. And with that in mind, I'd like to now turn things over to Suresh to share with you our vision for the future of UI Healthcare's clinical enterprise and our plan to elevate University of Iowa hospitals and clinics to a top 20 hospital nationally.
Is there a clicker for the slides that I might be able to?
I think you can.
Oh, I can do it off this.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, Regent Bates. All of you, it's great to be here. I appreciate that the schedule's moving a little bit faster today. This is just, I rode over with Mr. Hawes, and this is just highlights why I should be the one driving. Because if Brad had driven, we would have been here after Dr. Van Voorhees. But taking that into account, our report today is not simply on my driving skills. Really, I've been here for 6 months, and working with the senior leadership team, we've really tried to understand what is the future of the University of Iowa hospitals and clinics, and we've worked with President Harold, we've worked with our own faculty, we've worked at various different levels to say, when we plan for the future, what are we really trying to accomplish? And I think what we're really trying to accomplish is to maximize on the potential of what's been built already, but to use that to be a platform to really benefit all Iowans. And what you have in front of you is a very brief glimpse into more of this work and more of this story that you're going to hear about in subsequent months and meetings. But to get started, I would start here. The UI Healthcare difference in the lives of Iowans. So I'm 6 months into being an Iowan, and happy to report that at the university, we continue to see rising number of Iowans choosing UI Healthcare at unprecedented levels. We are hitting high volumes in every aspect of our business, whether it is in our inpatient setting, our outpatient setting, whether it's in our operating rooms, in our emergency rooms. We continue to see more Iowans choosing to get their care from us. Patients have traveled consistently from all 99 counties of Iowa this calendar year to receive their care at the University of Iowa across a whole broad spectrum of services. And as you know, we're the only comprehensive provider of medical care across all specialties for all patient payment populations, regardless of the individual's ability to pay, and we're very proud of that. And so we want to continue to be that difference in the lives of Iowans, but really the next two slides are about what that looks like to us. We want to build a system of care, to put it simply. We want, when Iowans need to get to the university, for that to be an intentional collaboration, not an accidental or last-minute collaboration. We want to develop models where we can work collaboratively with providers and facilities across the state so that more planfully those facilities and those providers can collaborate with the university so that there is more intentional collaboration in the health of our community. We've begun expanding our own clinics and our own services beyond Johnson County into other counties. But more broadly, it's not just our own expansion, it's working with not just other physician partners or hospital partners, but even thinking across the continuum, skilled nursing facilities, rehab facilities, and ultimately even social service organizations. Because a lot of what our patients need when they're waiting to go home is not a quality doctor to go home to. Quite often, the quality doctor is there, but it's those support services. It's the family. It's access to food. It's access to various issues. So it's important that we really think about this as a system of care. And what we are here to tell you is that we think our future is deeply intertwined with solving these problems. And we fully intend to focus our resources on collaboration. And we think that that may sometimes mean that there are less patients having to travel to Iowa City for their care, and that'll be plenty fine with us. But we still hope that if they don't travel, that they get the same positive outcome by staying in their community. So on the following slide, I think our aspirational goal is one of the things that I think that we really take for granted, that I think the organization is taking for granted when I've come in, is really our existing national rankings, which are pretty impressive. We are nationally ranked in 7 specialties as a hospital, 3 in the top 10 or top 12. If you look at other national hospitals that are ranked in the top 10 for any specialty, we're the only one that is not located in a population center. We're the only one. There is no other hospital that is able to get the rankings that we have achieved in a state that has only 3 million people in it. And the reason we've been able to do that, Dr. Jackson's highlighted, and the core of that is our ability to have a world-class faculty surrounded by world-class care teams. And if we want to create that momentum and build this system of care, being a top 20 hospital will allow us to recruit and retain both faculty and learners at the levels that are necessary to maintain this level of excellence. But because we're going to pursue a system of care, we won't judge ourselves simply by our hospital rankings, but what impact we're able to make on the entire state and the entire health of the community. And we want the highly ranked hospital to be the hub of that. But I think that our journey is really about how we can form a system of care in which the hospital in Iowa City is the backbone, but really all of the other parts of the network really help make a difference in Iowans' lives. We aspire to demonstrate that you can have rural health care that's integrated into our care system so that the right care can happen at the right place at the right time. And we finally intend to learn and listen from our communities when we design this system of care. I think that ultimately we can't win the long-term battles around the need for talent, healthcare talent in this state, without having a model that really is a national model of excellence. And I think we've already started such great momentum, but when you look at the plans that we're making, I think this is really about creating centers of excellence in very focused areas so that we can be more nationally distinguished. So I'll pause there if there are any questions.
Are there any questions? Okay. Go ahead.
All right, thanks. I'll turn it over to Mr. Haas.
What Suresh didn't say is I've decided to ride home with Dr. Jackson so that I can arrive safely. So, on these next sections, Suresh and I are going to tag team kind of going back and forth. What we wanted to do was highlight different initiatives that we have within the health system that are management focus so that I think we have more I guess, productive dialogue with the region so that you understand a little bit more. So on the first section, every time that we meet with you, we want to talk about a way in which we are becoming more efficient. It just so happens that the highlight for this month happens to be in the financial area and has to do with the revenue cycle. Part of this obviously goes to the fact that the more efficient we are, the lower our costs are, and we can pass those costs along ultimately to the residents of this great state. But a second look at that would be, we want to spend as little as possible on what I would call back office functions, so that we can dedicate more of our expense structure towards the caregiver and the things that actually touch the patient. And so when we look at our revenue cycle, that's very much a back office function. I don't think that anybody in this room would say that healthcare billing is something that is easily understood or highly intuitive. We are trying to help in that regard, and to that extent, we have hired an external group to help us evaluate. They did a two-part study. At first, they did a feasibility study to look at our operations relative to best in class. When they identified opportunities for us to improve, we actually then hired them to come in as an implementation partner in our operation. And we have a number of areas that we're focusing on to improve the efficiency and reduce the cost of our operations. We've just given you two examples here. One of the things that's very difficult for us in operations relates to getting pre-authorizations for services. Different payers have different requirements. Sometimes we see patients that may need an urgent procedure same day or next day, and getting that approval from the payers can be problematic and difficult. The difficulty comes from the fact that if we don't get that pre-authorization, we either have to delay the treatment, or we provide it and then we may not get paid. We get a denial after the fact. And so we are working very hard to sync up the timing to reduce the delays in patient care, or if we give the care, to make sure that we're not missing payment as we move forward. We are bringing those services. We have had a decentralized model for our pre-authorizations. We're putting those together now so that we have cross-fertilization backup teams, and we have areas of expertise to improve that process. When we do get a denial, we want to make sure that we are working that denial as efficiently as possible, that it doesn't get passed around in different work streams, and that we make sure that we're handling them in a timely fashion. We know that when we have a delayed denial or a delayed resolution of a financial account in healthcare, or any business really, that the likelihood of payment drops. And so we are working on preventing the denials in the first place, but when we get them, trying to make sure that we work them in an orderly and quick fashion. So these are very preliminary results that you'll see on the next page on slide 11. Our denial rate has dropped from about 8% when we were initially beginning, down to a much lower average, just below 7%. That small drop, while it might seem small in terms of an absolute percentage, has resulted in that time period of a savings of $1.7 million. So significant progress made by small changes. In addition to the payment increase, we then need less staff to work those accounts. And that allows us, if we need, with FTEs, we can now recommit those to other places that we need them, or remove them from our expense structure. In this specific example, we've been able to reduce our costs by $680,000. We do that through attrition and turnover. We have not had to do furloughs or layoffs to accomplish this. But we believe this is one example where you'll see many more. We have budgeted a little bit shy of $13 million of improvement in our next year's budget that starts in July, specifically related to some of these initiatives, and we believe that that number will grow as we move forward.
So the next section is on quality, but I do want to comment on what Brad just said. This revenue cycle savings, this efficiency savings, we're counting on in our upcoming budget to better compensate our clinicians at the bedside. So when we talk about where is this expense being moved from and what is it being moved to, what we find is that for laboratory scientists, for social workers, for OR nurses, that the market is very competitive, especially for our patient population that really requires a lot of training. So we can't just take any nurse and have them work in our ORs. Or social work, when we have patients from all over the state, we need to pay competitive salaries, and the ability to drive efficiencies through the revenue cycle directly allows us to be able to do this. So we are counting on these kinds of initiatives to have the success that we need to continue to make the investments in our people in this instance. But I wanted to make sure we link some of these things, is that this is not an optional imperative for us. This is one that we really rely on in order to be able to do those things, because retaining our clinical staff is such a critical issue, especially after it takes so long for us to train them to be ready to support these specialized procedures. The turnover is extremely painful. And so this revenue cycle initiative, although it seems exactly as boring as he made it sound, is very valuable to the...
It's the most exciting part of the day for me.
Brad, what do you attribute the improvement in the denial rate? Are they efforts on your part, or has there been a change in the industry? Because everything I hear is that other sectors of healthcare have experienced an increase in denial rate.
Yeah, this is mostly an in-house improvement. I wouldn't say that we have changes in the practices of the payers. We do get more efficiency when we can transact with them electronically through single pings. We know these are the data elements they want to approve it, and we don't have to go back and forth. But largely, this is the result of our improved processes on our side.
But what you've witnessed is true as an overall trend. Absolutely. This continues to be an adventurous climate, and even unintentional things happen. So in our state, Wellmark converted claim systems, and there was nothing malicious, but just life in the fast lane is that when you're converting systems, suddenly a whole lot of claims don't get paid. And so, you know, these things happen regularly when you're switching Medicaid providers, for instance. There will also be systemic issues that are not related to intentional efforts, but the unintentional efforts results in rework to us. So the contracts very much do favor the payers in terms of how claims get processed and who the burden is on in order to meet these obligations. So we will continue to have these blips through time. Okay. The next section, we will always talk a little bit about our commitment to quality. And again, our goal with the Regents is to be very transparent, and we continue to have areas that we do well and areas that we could improve. One area that we could improve is central line infections. And here, however, I wanted to give you a spotlight on success, where we have been able to pick a very focused area, organize an interdisciplinary team, and really put in some interventions that have made a difference. And so you can see here, year over year in our bone marrow transplant unit, we have made significant progress on central line infections, and we think that these interventions that we've put in, dedicated line dressing team, appropriate cleaning of the site, and reducing the total number of times we do draws in a very concerted way has had a meaningful difference in our patients' lives in a year. More exciting for us is that we think this is more broadly applicable beyond this team. And so the organization is funding a dedicated central line team, and we'll have it fully staffed by the end of the year. And I think this will really allow us to move the organization forward in this area. On the next slide, it's another area that maybe at the beginning of this story we weren't as proud of our performance as we are now. This is our data on when our staff is exposed to potentially harmful bodily fluids from patients, how quickly we are able to address the issue and apply intervention. And you can see that before we had a very long lag, as a lot of this had to do with the administrative processes we put in for reporting and to figure out what's the right response. And what we've done now is really streamline the process, made all of this very protocolized, so it's not dependent on getting a hold of the right physician or getting a hold of the right assessment, that we can initiate these kinds of responses in a much more expedited way. So you can see that we went from a response time that was almost a day to now being able to initiate that response within an hour. And again, this is the kind of talent that we have in-house and the kind of desire we have to improve that we really can capitalize on. So these are two spotlight areas that are going well. The third slide is one that is not going as well as I would like it to. And again, the purpose of these meetings is to continue to engage you in some of the things that we're working on that haven't fully gotten to where they need to. And so this is our hospital-acquired pressure injury. For those of you that have been seeing the metrics for a while, this is also the metric that used to be called the pressure ulcer measure. And this is a fairly common condition. that happens, especially when patients are in beds for a long period of time. For us, first I'll start with the weasel excuse. The weasel excuse is that compared to most hospitals in America, we tend to get patients that are at a sicker end of the spectrum, that are more prone to these conditions, and quite often, because we get so many transfers, they've been in somebody else's hospital bed for a long period of time before they get here. So that is one causation. However, the metric does adjust for acuity. So although we have half an excuse, we should do better. And so the industry has really changed its approach to doing this, and UI Healthcare is attempting to do that as well. But overall, what we have to do is invest in this. And so you can see that in the first quarter of 19, we had a precipitous increase in the number of these incidents, and then the subsequent quarter it went down. Neither quarter is that great performance. I wanted to be able to highlight this trend to you because we want to bring it back to you, because we are now initiating a dedicated team that is going to proactively identify the patients that are most at risk for this because of their condition, their background, et cetera. Work with the nursing team proactively on that unit to ensure that the appropriate movement in bed is identified, the appropriate scrutiny of the patient, appropriate engagement of the care team is done. So now we're going to have a team that isn't unit-based but is house-based in order to address this issue. And the reason I wanted to highlight this to you is that it's not always optimal performance from us, but I also want you to understand that the management team has a very healthy appetite to take on these issues, and that our great partners in this are both our faculty colleagues as well as our nursing and allied health staff. But in this area, I think we still have room for improvement. Turn it over to Brad for the next section.
So I think we've talked multiple times with you about the impact that growth has on our financial results, and that we feel like we have an imperative to grow that allows us to capture economies of scale. It also allows us to create what Suresh talked about in his earlier presentation about a system of care. So we've, in this slide deck, highlighted orthopedics. I think many of you have seen our orthopedics clinic, one that we're not particularly proud of, but a little more background on that service. So you can see the growth rate in the last couple years with orthopedics and what we project going into next year. What I will also tell you is that with these growth rates, our market share within orthopedics has stayed remarkably flat. And so this as a modality within healthcare has grown and will continue to grow significantly. I think as we all age, as we continue to have people that are more active, weekend warriors, those kinds of things, orthopedics is a fast-growing area of medical care. We continue to hire faculty to meet that demand and to provide what we believe is appropriate and high-quality care. We also work within that growth to make sure that we are as efficient as possible. Our orthopedists, to be candid with you, are remarkable in the way that they have standardized the use of implants. That is a key cost driver within our environment. When we buy, for example, if we had artificial knees that we were buying from 3 or 4 different vendors, the cost of those implants would be significantly higher than the rate we can negotiate when we get down to 1 or 2. And sometimes when you work in a hospital, the physicians have very particular preferences. Sometimes those are driven by the fact that they may have been the designer and inventor of a specific implant. Our faculty are very good with partnering with us to standardize and to make sure that those work well. An additional challenge that we have in orthopedics, though, is that while it's growing, the site of service, or where you might get an orthopedic procedure, is changing rapidly. Many orthopedic cases are trending towards ambulatory surgical centers, and many of them are trending towards not requiring an inpatient stay at all. Not too many months ago, about a year ago, Medicare used to require that total knees be done in a hospital with an inpatient stay. That they have come off that list. Many people now get a total joint replacement and they go home in less than 24 hours and they recover at home. And the data would show that those people do better. They're less exposure to infections. They're recovering with their family members. and it does better, even though often they start with a healthier population that's eligible to go home. When you do an apples-to-apples comparison, those do better. So we are working to adjust with the market, not only the growth, but the side of service, so that we can appropriately treat and reflect the best trends in the market. The very last point here, and I think you're also, and we'll talk more about this in the financials, but the growth in the procedures that do require an inpatient stay. So we get the most complicated, we get the revisions, those that have had surgery and have to come back and have a redo, essentially. Those patients have put a real strain on our bed capacity. And so as we look at our growth in orthopedics, we want to make sure that we're treating the ones that can be and should be without having them require a bed, so that when we do have a procedure like a very serious spine surgery, that we have the capacity to treat them and have them in-house. And so we're trying to grow, not just for growth's sake, but to grow appropriately and efficiently to make sure that we're giving the best care for our patients.
And as Brad was highlighting, I think one of the key points on this is that the demand for these services continues to far outstrip our ability to do it. And so when we look at it, orthopedic care across the state, not just with the U, it's very difficult to get these surgeries scheduled without a 2, 3, 4 week timeline. And then for these patients that only we are the ones that are able to do, they have to experience even more of a wait. And so think about the circumstances. This is someone who really needs a complex joint replaced. They probably already are experiencing other healthcare issues. Perhaps they've already had a first surgery with someone else that didn't work out that great. So this is a population that we're happy to treat, but it's also very, very complicated, and to make that group wait doesn't make us any happier, but we continue to experience so much demand. If you read the national journals, we're not supposed to be experiencing this demand. We're supposed to be experiencing demand for the 24 hours and go home, or the don't ever come into the hospital and go back to your house model. In the state of Iowa, we are continuing to experience everything that is not in the magazine. And so I just want to reiterate that this is another one of those I'm not in Texas moments, because in Texas, the trend is like the magazine. Everything is on the outpatient side. There's a spine center every other block that sends you home. I'm not sure that the quality outcomes are happening in Texas, but for another day. But I would just say here, if we're talking about meeting the needs of Iowans, we need some of these more complex capabilities. Next section is our focus on patients. And again, this is the area that I have brought to you. We have the greatest room for improvement as an enterprise. It's the area that I think that we most lag between what our national and our clinical reputation is and what our actual patient satisfaction scores are. And again, I'm going to walk you through the scores because as Dr. Jackson has always insisted, there isn't any excellence without transparency. And we're going to be transparent about all of these things, but you do have to allow me to give the excuses first. The physical plant doesn't make it any easier because it's our inpatient scores that significantly suffer, and it's difficult to get good inpatient scores when you are sharing the room with another patient, especially when you're sharing the room with a relatively sick patient. Things like sleep and things like quiet and privacy, a simple screen doesn't make that any easier. The fact that we are always full and at 90–95% capacity pretty much eliminates the ability for us to do this. Many of our beds are taken by prisoners who, by mandate, get the luxury of their own private room. And so all of these circumstantial factors, not to mention the complexity of parking next to Kinnick, is all not in our favor within our patient satisfaction scores. However, none of these factors are so overwhelming that we can't do better. We know we can do better. We're focused on doing better because ultimately these patient satisfaction scores are only partially a reflection of a semi-private room. They are a reflection of how well our providers and our staff are communicating with patients and their families and meeting their needs. And we know we can do better, and I'll walk you through what we're working on. So overall, as an organization, we are just below the median for patient satisfaction nationally. That's probably okay for a lot of places. That's entirely unacceptable for us. We would expect in everything that we do to be in the top 20% of what we do. So we're way off of where our goals are and what we expect of ourselves. Many departments are high performing. So when you look at our outpatient clinic scores, they are very good. One meeting, I'll bring those here just so we can know that we have some bright spots. Consistently, our outpatient scores are very, very good. But that's not what I want to talk about today. Our inpatient scores are really the focus of this presentation. So right now, what I wanted to do when I came in 6 months ago is really prove to the organization that we can focus on some of our lower performing units and really create some practices in these areas that we really have struggled and show that we can develop models in these low performing units that really show the organization that we can rally around this, we can make improvements, and the scores really can change. And I'm happy to report to you, we haven't fully done what we need to do, but the progress has already started. And so on the next slide is an example of, I apologize that I'm not flipping appropriately. This is an example of where we are on nurses kept you informed. And this is one of our lowest performing units. This is not our overall score, but this is a Roy Carver, which is a surgery specialty service unit. It's also a difficult unit to have high patient satisfaction on for a different reason, because it gets so many different kinds of surgical patients. So when the nurses all have different kinds of patients with different care teams, with different surgeons, it's a lot more difficult to convey to patients and families that you know what's going on, you know what's coming next. It's not as predictable. And so that's another unit-specific excuse. But when you look at this, you see that the nurses kept you informed was not where it needs to be. And you can see here, consistently, we have focused on how we can do a rollout of a program that we call Compassionate Connected Care, which is very specific scripting, that is very care plan specific to keep families informed on how we're doing this. We are doing better on bedside handoffs, which means really when at shift change, when one staff member goes to the next staff member, what are the outstanding issues that the family is waiting on? We're doing now hourly rounding, so the nurse manager of the unit is now leaving the office and going around the unit on an hourly basis to identify gaps. And finally, there's leadership rounding at multiple levels. And as you can see, progress is possible. And I think that we will continue to experience this upward trend. The next slide is just another focus that also shows that in lockstep, the likelihood to recommend also increased on this unit. So although this 39th percentile is nothing that we consider acceptable or adequate, we think that some of these lower performing units represent an opportunity for us. I will turn it over to Brad to take us through the most exciting portion of today's events. So the financial performance.
See that tongue in cheek. Before the trends that we have talked about repeatedly here are very consistent, and I'll highlight a few of those. I do think it's useful at the beginning of these financial presentations to rebase a little bit to make sure that we're all on the same page about is a margin necessary in healthcare? And if there is a margin, why is that important? The things that we have talked about today in terms of keeping up with technology, expanding beds, and doing all of those things would be impossible if we did not generate an operating margin. The most fundamental need is that when we go to replace an MRI machine, or when we go to build out an OR or a patient room, those things are far more expensive than they were when they were originally purchased. And so just the fact that capital and technology is more expensive now than it was then means that our depreciation expense that we kind of hold back to replace the capital is not sufficient to keep our standard around technology and space. And so if we did not have a margin, in fact, if we don't have a healthy margin, we would slowly lose ground relative to the rest of the industry, and we would not be able to provide, I think, the excellent care that we're known for and that is expected by our patients here. So on slide 24, these are the highlights. We continue to be very full. This is not, as you look at the margin, we are running year to date 5.7% operating margin versus a budget of 2.8. The month was actually even stronger than that. We actually had lower volumes in February with the cold weather, so March was a little bit of a bounce back. Not always sure how much care can be postponed and how elastic that is, but we did okay in March. We are down in admissions, but we are up in patient days, which then tells us we're treating a sicker patient, and that's shown in our acuity levels. The census, as Suresh indicated, often above 90%. When you get above 90%, that becomes very difficult operationally. It takes the flexibility that we need, and when you average 90%, you probably have days close to 100. When we get very close, we have not actually crossed this threshold, but get very close to turning patients away. And knock on wood, we have not had to do that at this point. Our payer mix has stabilized. Over the last 2 or 3 years, we have trended more towards government payers, Medicare and Medicaid specifically, and that has stabilized, and we are seeing more contracted commercial patients, and that has helped us. Medicare staying very, very constant. The AR that you see on that page, Suresh referenced this earlier. One of actually our largest commercial payer in the state, Wellmark, changed their claim system. They are unable, in many cases, to process the claims accurately. And so what we have done is ask them to hold the claims until they can do it accurately so we don't have to rework them. That causes two difficulties for us and for the patients. That means we don't know eventually what the patient responsibility is, and so a surgery now that may have been 2 or 3 months ago, we will finally get the insurance processing and then bill the patient. That's not ideal. It also, the float matters. We have tried to mediate that at some level. We have asked for an interim payment from Wellmark that we're sitting on until they can process the claims. My staff told me today that we probably will go back to them for another interim payment because they have not gotten current in their claims processing. So our AR days are growing because of that difficulty. On the non-salary expense, this is maybe something that we can bring back.
I have a question.
Sure.
So have they given you an idea of when that's going to be fixed? Really?
We have asked many times, and we have not been given a firm time frame.
Wow.
It's difficult,
Yeah.
very difficult.
Thanks.
One thing that we may want to talk about in a future meeting is the role that pharmaceuticals are playing in healthcare. And so you'll see here, we reference that implant costs and pharmacy costs are over budget. What you would see on the pharmacy side is that we also have a revenue pickup. You may have seen in their literature, national literature lately, about some drugs that are costing over $2 million per dose. And that is something that is growing. We're told that there are many, many drugs like that in the pipeline. And that's something that we're operationally having to focus on to make sure that we're handling those appropriately. But so far that has been a lift for us financially. So very quickly on slide 25 with the financials, you can see the 5.7% operating margin year to date. I will point you to where we were last year at 2.6%. That is not an acceptable margin, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So we're very proud of the improvement. It is really driven both by a combination of higher patient volumes and our ability to manage our expenses within those volumes. And so we are very happy with the margin, and it looks like we will continue to see that and close the year at essentially that same level. And then the last slide, this is one that I think we've committed to bring you on a regular basis. The rating agencies look at us really in 3 domains. There are actually many more sub-measures, but these are the 3 main categories. So margin, our 5.7% is there. You can see how that compares to a Moody's median for AA rated healthcare industry bonds. So we're doing better in that category. The agencies are asking us, is that sustainable? And when you look at a year ago when we were at 2.6, 2.7%, that created great alarm. And so they're pleased with our performance, but they want to know that it's not just a blip. Part of the reason that they worry about that is we do not have kind of the cushion that many might have. So the liquidity or our ability to handle an unexpected surprise is often measured by the number of days expense that we have in hand. They would expect us to have 265 days cash on hand. We are at 199 at the end of March. And so higher margin helps us at some level offset the fact that we don't have the same building days cash on hand is probably the same level of difficulty it is in our personal lives to add to our savings. And so that's a very difficult thing to correct. And then on the bottom, our leverage, we are much less leveraged than what you would see, and we have plans as we kind of develop our capital outlook that we would go back to the market and use debt financing rather than our operating capital to the degree possible. But when we talk to the rating agencies about more debt, one of the things they focus on immediately is the margin. So trying to tie those three things together is very important for us. So that's the end, I think, of the exciting part, the
Is that the
financial.
exciting part?
I have a question. The days cash on hand is, I don't recall what it was the last report.
I think it was at 194, Mike.
Okay, so it's
Yeah, so
about
we're
the same, but
little better, but about the same.
creeping up.
It's been creeping up for about a year and a half, maybe.
I think at the low point, I'm not sure the exact time frame, it was at 160. And so being at 190 is significant improvement, but we still got a lot of ground to make up.
We built children's.
Yep, drop.
Go
Quick
ahead,
question.
Regent Barker.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just,
Okay.
go ahead.
Nurse retention rate, how does that compare with similar institutions, and do you see any trends in that?
So overall, our nurse retention rate through this year has significantly improved to what I would say is consistent with national trends. The prior 2-year period, we actually had the most difficult nurse retention period, which also had a lot of operating expenses associated with temporary nurses. And so what we've been able to do, and we've been blessed to do, is we have been very successful at recruiting younger nurses and investing in our own programs to train up young nurses. So I think we are still in the watch cycle, because I think that as these nurses become more experienced, we hope to be competitive to retain them. Because I feel as though one of the things we've done a little bit is be innovative. You know, with such a high vacancy and turnover rate, what could we really do to transform our workplace to be attractive? Well, we're very attractive to new nurses. They believe that this is a great place to perfect your skills, this is a great place to grow. I think we have to keep an eye on our retention of experienced nurses. So when we talk about needing to make investments and market adjustments, it's almost always in the experienced nurses. And so one of our big initiatives for fiscal year 20 is precisely that, to combat that issue. Because I think that especially in our OR areas, some of our OR areas, you see on the nursing side that it's there. I'd also answer that we have some pretty high turnover in non-nursing. So our therapies have increasingly seen more turnover as well. And so although nursing is our single largest part of our workforce, some of these other health providers we're having to also ensure that we stay competitive on.
Does anybody, Regent Butker?
Thank you. When you talked about Wellmark and not accurate information, what is that? What are the repercussions for a patient or a person who has Wellmark, and we'd like to check the accuracy of what maybe we're responsible for? How in the world would we go about doing that?
Yeah, that's typically that would be handled through their kind of patient care representatives. I think when we've seen inaccuracies, they will suspend claims processing so that they're not doing it inaccurately. I won't say that there haven't been errors. The unfortunate circumstance that happens sometimes is you get a provider and a payer pointing, and so Wellmark says it was our fault that we billed inappropriately, and we say that the claim wasn't processed appropriately. That's the worst for the patient. In these situations, to try to avoid that, it's the claims will sit and wait until their system is up and they're testing small batches. The difficulty that creates for the patient then is there's a significant delay in understanding what their copay, coinsurance, and out-of-pocket responsibility would be.
So when you call, essentially, you're going to be not on telephone hold, but your account is a little bit on hold. So they will say that you got to see Dr. Van Voorhees. The the bill has been submitted, but it hasn't been adjudicated yet, so we don't know what the patient responsibility is. So that's what patients are experiencing today. Wellmark members will be experiencing that. And on the one hand, Wellmark is not making any patient pay anything during that period of time, but it creates a whole lot of uncertainty, especially for those of us that get a lot of health care and really care what our deductible is. Has it been met? Has it not been met? You know, where am I with that? I think that can be really disconcerting to members, but I think right now they're not forcing any member to pay anything until this gets resolved. But I think it's more the uncertainty and the delays.
Are there any other questions before we go on with the? I just want to thank you for a good report before I get to the end of the presentation. Somebody mentioned the word adventure. You're taking an adventure and making it workable, and I really appreciate the problems that maybe you've seen and showed us how you were working on those and making those better. I think that's really important, so thank you. Anyway, Dr. Jackson?
Okay, thank you very much. And now for what is actually the most exciting presentation of the session. I am pleased to introduce today's faculty presenter, Brad Van Voorhees. I am the on in vitro fertilization program. Dr. Van Voorhees is an alumnus of Iowa State University, majoring in chemistry, went to the University of Iowa, did his for medical school, and did his residency training at the Medical College of Virginia and fellowship training at Brigham and Women's Hospital at Harvard Medical School. He's been on the faculty at the University of Iowa since 1990, almost 30 years, where he is professor and division director of reproductive endocrinology and infertility in the departments of obstetrics and gynecology. And for many years, he has directed the in vitro fertilization program, also known as IVF, at Iowa. He began the fellowship program in reproductive endocrinology and infertility and directed it as well. He is also the executive vice chair for the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. Nationally, Dr. Van Voorhees has been president of the Society for Reproductive Endocrinologists and president for the Society of Assisted Reproductive Technologies. His research is focused on outcomes from infertility care, focusing on the health of children born from infertility care, cost-effective treatment methods, and minimizing the complications of in vitro fertilization. His most recent work is on single embryo transfer as a means of reducing multiple births after IVF. He's collaborated with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to mount a national campaign to reduce prematurity and multiple births following IVF treatment. This is an extremely interesting and exciting field. On our 2.5-hour ride over here, I received a mini fellowship in vitro fertilization and think I could be board certified at this point. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Van Voorhees. So.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Jackson. He is a very quick learner. He caught on to the concepts quickly. My goal today is to impress on you how a true center of excellence like our IVF program can improve the health and well-being of patients from Iowa. And I've chosen to do that by presenting a case. This is a true case, and I've gotten this couple's permission to present their case to you. She's a 28-year-old woman and her husband from Des Moines who came in with 2 years of infertility to our clinic. She'd also had 2 prior early miscarriages. We did a workup and diagnosed her with polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is a common cause of infertility where women don't ovulate or release an egg each month. And therefore it takes longer to get pregnant, or perhaps they can't get pregnant at all. We initially treated her with medications to help her ovulate, and she in fact was able to conceive, but unfortunately had a 3rd miscarriage. And this was devastating to them. We did a complete workup for possible causes of recurrent loss and didn't find any. And so their question to us obviously was what next? Infertility is a real common disorder. It's distressing to those who are affected. It's defined as a disease and a disability due to impairment of reproductive function. And unlike many diseases, it often is not covered by insurance. And so the financial repercussions are borne by the patients themselves. which adds to the stress of the whole situation. So for this couple, we elected to do an IVF cycle. I've tried to kind of highlight what goes on in an IVF cycle in this slide. In the upper left, you can see an ovary by ultrasound. The top panel is an unstimulated ovary, and then the panel right beneath it shows ovarian follicles which have been stimulated to grow by medications that we've given. When those follicles, which are egg-containing units, are mature, we go in with a needle and retrieve the eggs, and the panel D, labeled D there, is a human egg. We then fertilize those eggs and then grow them in the lab for 5 days to the blastocyst stage, which is shown by the H picture labeled H. So that's a human embryo at the blastocyst stage. So in our IVF program, typically what we would do at this point is transfer the embryo back to the uterus, one embryo, and then freeze the others. But in this patient's case, we were concerned that she may experience another miscarriage because the most common reason to miscarry is genetic abnormalities of those embryos. So a new technique that's been developed is called pre-implantation genetic testing of embryos. And this shows I think I have a slide, or let's see, how do I make this move? There we go. So we're biopsying this embryo. I'm not sure why it's not moving right at the moment. Yeah, there we go. Whoops, there we go. So the laser, basically what we're doing is taking some cells from this human embryo. The laser is firing to get the cells loosened from the rest of the embryo. And then we take those cells, send them to the lab to be tested, and freeze the embryos while we wait for that test result to come back. And we hope to find some embryos that are genetically normal to minimize the risk of miscarriage for this couple. So anyway, this is kind of a high-tech new treatment that we're doing more and more frequently in our IVF center. Now, it turns out that this couple came to a good center, an excellent center for in vitro fertilization. I've demonstrated the most recent national data that we have for IVF outcomes that are divided by patient's age. And you can see that for women under 35, about half of them will get pregnant from an IVF cycle, and those numbers go down quite dramatically as women get older in their reproductive years. This is the results that we get at the University of Iowa in 2017, and this, as I'll show you in a few slides, is true nearly every year, where we far exceed national averages no matter which age that we're looking at. Now, one of the complications that we get with IVF is multiple birth, because some centers will transfer multiple embryos back to try and improve their pregnancy rates. We've really prided ourselves on our ability to transfer one or at most two embryos, still maintain excellent pregnancy rates, and reduce multiple rates, as shown here, where our twinning rate is far below that seen in other centers across the country. And this has great advantages to the health of the babies that are born from IVF. So our motto is a single healthy baby at a time. That's what we're trying to achieve for our patients. So why the difference? Why do we do better? Well, we transfer fewer embryos, we have a great lab, and we have a team that's really committed to being the very best in the country. This demonstrates the rate of single embryo transfers done at our center compared to national averages. About 15 years ago, we started studying single embryo transfer, and at that time it was almost never done. Always 2, 3, 4 embryos were put back, but we felt we could do better. And you can see over time we've continued to exceed national averages. Although across the nation people are picking up on this and realizing this is the way to go, we still are doing better than nearly all centers in the country. And this has resulted in much lower multiple birth rates across the years of our program's existence compared to national averages, which are in gray there on this slide. Again, while maintaining high live birth rates for all of our patients across many years. So back to the case that I was describing. In this patient, we successfully fertilized multiple eggs. We grew the embryos. We did our genetic testing, and fortunately, we were able to find several normal embryos that were genetically normal. We transferred one embryo back to this patient, and she was pregnant. She recently sent us some photos. Here they are in the delivery room. She had a cesarean section back here in Des Moines, or not here in Des Moines, but in Des Moines. And then you can see a family picture after going home from that hospitalization. Here are a couple more pictures from this couple that they sent to us. So we have a full spectrum fertility center. We not only do in vitro fertilization, but have really the full spectrum of infertility care available at the University of Iowa and get great outcomes in all of them. So we're very pleased that in August we're moving to a new center that the Board of Regents approved, I'm certain. We're going to occupy the upper floor of this building at North Dodge, and we think it's going to allow us to expand our lab, expand our services, grow, as has been emphasized here, the importance of growth. And we're really excited about this new state-of-the-art facility that you allowed for us to have. So this is a note that I got from the couple thanking us for making their dreams come true. We're so in love with our daughter, Natalie. We hope that someday you can meet her. And here's a more recent picture of Natalie. So it's not only the numbers, but the way we can impact the health and well-being of our patients through centers of excellence at the University of Iowa. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Brad. I will say, and correct me if I'm wrong from our tutorial today, but in vitro fertilization babies are about 2% of all babies born in the United States today, which is like 60,000. That's really, and it's going to grow, right?
It's absolutely growing all the time as couples delay childbearing, which is a national trend, a societal trend. More and more couples are needing to turn to IVF to achieve pregnancies, and so we feel like it's going to continue to grow through time.
Fantastic. Are there any questions, or Regent Butker?
Thank you. Great presentation. Thank you
thank you.
so much. Donor sperm. Do couples use this like when they're going off for military, and is that a depository place that people can do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it used to be the only option, say, for a single person going off to service or having chemotherapy for cancer was to preserve sperm. But in the last 10 years or so, we've improved our ability to freeze eggs now. So fertility preservation is a growing area in our treatments. So we see most cancer patients who are of reproductive age before they undergo chemotherapy, for example, and in some of them who elect to, we'll stimulate them, retrieve the eggs, and freeze them for then later use when they survive and are cured of their cancer. They can then come back and have healthy children, because the chemotherapy often would eliminate that chance for pregnancy. So fertility preservation, either for medical reasons or even for social reasons or elective reasons, are things that are increasing in frequency. Yeah, good question.
Thank you very much. I would like to say, if there's a contest, your presentation wins. Sorry. Thank you. Is there any other business to come before the committee? Hearing none, the committee will receive the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics presentation, including opening remarks, University of Iowa Healthcare Patient Care Vision, Operating and Financial Performance Report, and faculty presentation. The University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinic Committee is now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Safe travels.
Nice job,
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Jane talks about your family all the time. Yeah. See you. You too.
board is going to undergo a sexual harassment seminar. However, she won't be here for 15 minutes. So with approval, we'll skip to one of the things that the legislative item F, the legislative session summary. I believe we can get that presentation done. And then we'll have one less later. Thank you. Well, we want to hear what you say.
Well, thank you,
Yeah.
President Richards. Overall, this past legislative session was a good year for the Regents. We received a 2.7% increase from the state's general fund. That included an increase of $12 million for the 3 universities, a new $1.1 million to begin the Bioscience Innovation Program. This funding goes to Iowa State, the University of Iowa, and it's in conjunction with the Iowa Economic Development Authority. There was a new $400,000 appropriated to UNI's metal casting centers for additive manufacturing capabilities relating to investment castings. A new $130,000 for the Iowa Center for Ag Safety and Health at the University of Iowa. An increase of $300,000 for Iowa State's vet diagnostic lab operations. An increase of $1 million for the Governor's STEM Advisory Council, which is located at UNI. And the 2 special schools received a combined 3.3% increase. And this is the first time the legislature, in my knowledge, has increased their appropriation at a percentage higher than the rest of the K through 12 schools. They received 2.06%. So it's a recognition of the differences between the 2 special schools. They do not receive any property tax dollars, and they're not part of the state school aid formula. In terms of our economic development funding, the 3 universities continue to receive their funding from the state's Skilled Worker and Job Creation Fund at a total of $8.7 million. When it comes to state infrastructure dollars for construction projects, the Regents received full funding for our tuition replacement, and that's the money that pays the debt service for academic revenue bonds that have been previously approved by the legislature. Final year funding was received for Iowa's pharmacy building and Iowa State's biosciences building. Iowa State's vet diagnostic lab received their 2nd year appropriation of the 6 years that were previously enacted. The Iowa School for the Deaf will receive the total of $4.3 million over the next 2 years to renovate and modernize Long Hall. And UNI will receive $1 million in fiscal year 2021 to get started on the renovation and expansion of the Industrial Technology Center. The legislature is also requiring the Regents to provide a report to the General Assembly by December regarding how the board defines new construction and renovations, a list of capital projects initiated due to extraordinary circumstances, and the current method used by the board and institutions to develop financing plans for capital projects. The report must also include recommendations regarding the type of capital projects that should be eligible for state funding, the share of state funding capital projects that should be funded with non-state dollars, and how the fundraising plan will be developed for state-funded projects. So we will work over the interim to work on this report to the General Assembly. Finally, there were a few major policy bills that were adopted this year that affect the Regents institution. You've already addressed the free speech on campus bill during your April board meeting. Legal sports wagering and fantasy sports betting was also adopted. We were able to get language included in the bill that specifically prohibits sports betting on the performance or non-performance of individual Iowa College student athletes during the game. This means that bets cannot be placed on the college student athlete or on the opposing team's players for that specific game, whether the game is played in Iowa or in another state. Also, starting July 1st, non-projectile stun guns will be allowed on Regent universities and community college campuses. We were able to get language included that the universities can prohibit the stun guns from stadiums and the hospital, and we can also prohibit persons convicted of a felony from having a stun gun on campus. And finally, we worked on a bill that was important to the deaf community. Starting July 1st, designation of a hearing impairment can now be noted on their vehicle registration, so the law enforcement will know if the driver is hearing impaired before they approach the car. And Iowa DOT is required to develop educational materials to raise awareness of this change, so deaf and hard of hearing applicants can request their driver's license or non-operator card be marked to reflect their status. So that's the overview of the types of legislation and budgets that affect the Regents, and I will take any questions.
Are there any questions for Mary? Well, on behalf of the Regents, I'd like to thank the SROs, the university presidents who individually advocated at the legislature, Superintendent Gettle, and the Regents. I'd like to thank everyone for all your time and effort that you spent over there. And we will continue to do the same thing next year with, I hope, that another successful year with the legislature. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Now we're ready to go with the, and Amy, oh. Five-minute break to for the presentation to get set up, and just really 5 minutes. Thanks. What? Let's bring this meeting back to order. First, I would like to introduce the legal counsel for the Board of Regents, Amy Cleese.
Thank you, President Richards. It's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce Dr. Adrienne Lyles to the board, who will be providing a sexual harassment training for the board and board office staff. Dr. Lyles serves as the Associate Director of Equal Opportunity and the Senior Deputy Title IX Coordinator for Iowa State University. She received her undergraduate degrees in philosophy and English from ISU. She also has a master's and PhD in philosophy and her Juris Doctorate. Prior to joining ISU, Dr. Lyles taught philosophy. She served as the director of the Justice Education Program at St. Mary's College, and she also engaged in the private practice of law. So, welcome, Dr. Lyles.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, board. Thank you so much for this opportunity to come in and have a conversation about sexual harassment in the workplace. So again, my name is Adrienne. I work in the Office of Equal Opportunity at Iowa State. And our office is charged with navigating concerns related to discrimination and harassment at Iowa State, including sexual misconduct. So in my role as Senior Deputy Title IX Coordinator, I help to work on sexual misconduct issues, which include sexual harassment. In terms of the kinds of things that we see in our office, just to share with you what we see on a day-to-day basis. A variety of kinds of sexual misconduct. So when we use that language, we're talking about things like sexual assault, sexual harassment, sexual exploitation, sexual intimidation, stalking, and intimate partner violence. And oftentimes there are complicated power dynamics at play in higher education and also in the workplace. And when power is at play, that can make navigating sexual harassment situations pretty complicated. We see a lot of issues among colleagues and different power dynamics in terms of faculty, graduate students, students, related to inappropriate comments, inappropriate touching. And oftentimes people are not comfortable reporting concerns about sexually harassing behavior because they're afraid of retaliation. There are a variety of factors associated with increased risk of harassment as well that we see in both higher education and just in the workplace in general, especially in regards to certain disciplines such as accommodation and food service, working in isolated contexts, lacking legal immigration status, working in a male-dominated field, and working in settings with significant power differentials. So although my particular jurisdiction is in the Office of Equal Opportunity at ISU, I think a lot of the work that we do in our office translates into the workplace as well. Again, I'm grateful for the opportunity to share with you a discussion about sexual harassment. And this is a real live issue, right? So when we think about the Me Too movement and think about what's happening just in our culture, since April 2017, over 270 celebrities, politicians, CEOs, and others have been publicly accused of sexual misconduct. This is happening in every arena of our culture, right? And this happens in higher ed. So just this year in the news, we're seeing a variety of different kinds of sexual harassment across different campuses. As you may be aware, there was a recent bill introduced in the Texas legislature such that university employees who learned about and failed to report Title IX complaints could be fired or face criminal charges. There's a recent concern at UC Berkeley about the Board of Regents not sufficiently responding to sexual harassment. This is in the news all the time, so it's really an important conversation. We know that it continues to be a big issue in Iowa. So for instance, 2 weeks ago, 25 women in 20 different cities filed lawsuits against McDonald's. This is alive in Iowa, a lot of workplace walkouts because of concerns about sexual harassment. And in February and March of this year, there have been payouts made by Iowa related to sexual harassment claims. So it's an important conversation. What we're gonna be talking about today is first, harassment and discrimination in general. Talking about what sexual harassment in particular is. I'll share with you what federal and state laws say about sexual harassment. We'll talk about knowing your rights and responsibilities related to sexual harassment, being able to identify it, and knowing how to avoid, intervene in, and respond to harassing behavior when you encounter it. So when we think about what sexual harassment is, I think it's really important to kind of take a step back and talk about discrimination and harassment in general. So discrimination is an adverse treatment based on actual or perceived protected status. So when you think about a non-discrimination statement, so for instance, Iowa State University does not discriminate on the basis of race, ethnicity, sex, gender. Discrimination would be adverse treatment based on actual or perceived protected class status. Harassment is a form of discrimination, okay? And it's unwelcome conduct based on actual or perceived protected status that is sufficiently severe or pervasive so as to unreasonably interfere with education or employment. So again, sexual harassment is a form of discrimination. We can think about this as being defined in 4 prongs. So first, it's an unwelcome verbal, visual, nonverbal, or physical conduct that is of a sexual nature or based on someone's sex, that is severe or pervasive, and affects working conditions or creates a hostile work environment. Importantly, when we're thinking about sexual harassment, there are several considerations to keep in mind. First of all, it can occur anywhere, right? So it can occur at the office, in the workplace, at meetings, at conferences, at events. When we're talking about the parties, and in the work we do, we talk in the language of complainant and respondent, where the complainant is the person who has been impacted by the misconduct, and the respondent is the party who is alleged to have engaged in misconduct. We use those terms intentionally to stay neutral in order to ensure fairness of due process. So when we talk about the respondent, the person who's engaging in a negative behavior, again, think about power dynamics. So it could be a colleague, it could be a supervisor, it could be a direct report, it could be a vendor. So whether it's in the higher ed context or in the workplace, there are all these different opportunities in which potential misconduct could happen. Also, the respondent and complainant can be any sex, any gender identity, right? The complainant, when you think about workplace complaints or complaints in higher ed, the complainant doesn't actually have to be the person harassed. So if you are in a workspace and when you see one of your colleagues being sexually harassed, you can file a complaint on their behalf. And whenever there is a complaint related to sexual harassment, it's really important to keep in mind that there are due process protections for all the parties involved. So at Iowa State, we are very, very careful to ensure equal due process for all complainants and respondents from beginning to end. So this includes things like notice of the complaint, privacy of information that is available or shared, opportunity to participate in the process, the provision of support and resources to both the complainant and the respondent, a commitment to a fair and impartial investigation by a neutral fact finder, and also importantly, protection from retaliation. When we think about any kind of harassment or discrimination, again in higher ed or in the workplace, people are afraid to report because they're afraid of retaliation. So that freedom from retaliation is an important piece. When we're thinking about sexual harassment, both federal and state law apply. So I'd like to just briefly give you an overview of what that looks like. When we're talking about federal law, we're talking about Title VII. Title VII prohibits discrimination in employment on the basis of sex, race, color, religion, and national origin. So these are those protected classes that I mentioned earlier. Title VII applies to all employers with 15 or more employees. It also makes it illegal to retaliate against a person for complaining about discrimination or harassment or for participating in an investigation. And Title VII is enforced by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. When we say that there are prohibitions on discrimination or harassment, that is in regard to any area of employment. So recruiting, hiring, promoting, transferring, training, disciplining, discharge, benefits. There's a prohibition on discrimination in any of those areas. So the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, is the compliance agency that ensures that Title VII is being adhered to. So they define sexual harassment, again, as conduct of a sexual nature that is so frequent or severe that it creates either a hostile or offensive working environment or results in an adverse employment action. So when we talk about conduct of a sexual nature, we're looking usually at like quid pro quo, so do this for that. An employment decision is based on submission to a request or submission to conduct. In a hostile work environment, when we use that language, we're talking about conduct that makes the work environment intimidating, hostile, or offensive. And it could rise to sexual harassment if that conduct creates that hostile environment or results in an adverse employment action, like a firing or a demotion. I would share that certain things are not sexual harassment, so isolated incidents, offhand remarks, simple teasing would not rise to the level of conduct of a sexual nature that would be sufficiently frequent or severe. In terms of state law, the Iowa Civil Rights Act of 1965 applies regarding sexual harassment. And here particularly it says it is a discriminatory practice to hire, accept, register, classify, or refer for employment against any applicant or employee, again, because of protected class, age, race, creed, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, religion, or disability of such applicant or employee. In terms of Iowa state law, this is enforced by the Iowa Civil Rights Commission, the ICRC. Now, ICRC provides a very, very helpful kind of chart about protected class and what kinds of discrimination or harassment are prohibited. So I would just draw your attention to, on the left, a variety of protected classes and where the protections are. So for instance, age is a protected class regarding employment and credit, but not regarding housing and public accommodation. Physical disability, race, religion, sex, sexual orientation are prohibited across the different areas. So again, to review, I'd just like to go over those four prongs again regarding what sexual harassment is. So first, unwanted. First prong is unwanted, that the conduct is unwelcome. And we always advise that anytime that there is unwelcome conduct, someone say something, right? Oftentimes people don't feel comfortable to, but if something's happening that you don't like, say something. In terms of conduct being of a sexual nature, again, this can be verbal or written, physical, nonverbal, or visual. It is important in the work that we do, and I just think in the workplace, to distinguish between harassment and bullying behavior. We often talk about bullying in the workplace as well. The difference is that bullying and harassment can look the same. The key is that harassment is based on protected class. So bullying behavior that's not based on protected class is bullying. Bullying behavior that's based on protected class would constitute harassment. This can look like commenting about someone's clothing, jokes, blocking someone's movement, touching, gestures, looking someone up and down, different kinds of visual means can all be conduct that's of a sexual nature. A key is whether the conduct is severe or pervasive. So remember, if it's just an isolated incident, isolated conduct, it would not rise to sufficiently severe or pervasive. So when we're talking about severe, it has to somehow be egregious. And if an act is egregious enough, one act could be enough. In terms of pervasive, over time. So there could be a bunch of minor incidents that over time, right, could rise to the level of harassment. That would be pervasive. If it's less severe but persists over time, that can be enough. So questions to assess pervasiveness are things like, how many times did the conduct occur? How long has the conduct been going on? Prong 4, the conduct affects working conditions or creates a hostile work environment. So again, thinking about those adverse actions, was the party who's alleging having been negatively impacted, for example, did they get reassignment to a less desirable position? Did they get a negative performance evaluation? Were they demoted? Were they refused a promotion? In terms of hostile work environment, again, we're looking to whether the conduct unreasonably interferes with work performance or again creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. When we're thinking about these analyses, we're using like a reasonable person standard. That would be a reasonable person under those circumstances. Would they find it offensive? I provided a couple of scenarios just for your review. We won't go over these. I would just like to bring them to your attention. So in thinking about when you are encountering a scenario and could this be potentially sexually harassing, what we ought to be thinking about is, what is the conduct that could be concerning? Is the conduct unwelcome? Is the conduct of a sexual nature? Is it severe or pervasive? And again, does the conduct affect working conditions or create a hostile working environment? In terms of just each of us in our workplace, I offer you a few options of kind of what to do if you encounter or experience sexual harassment. If I've been harassed, right, if a person's been harassed, what we advise is, first of all, document, document, document. If you're experiencing concerning behavior, it's really important to keep emails, communications, keep a journal, keep a record of any potentially concerning behavior. If it's affecting your work productivity, we say, please keep a record of that. How are you being negatively impacted? Recording your experience to the negative conduct. That's really important for investigators if you decided to file a complaint. We always hope that there is a policy to turn to related to sexual harassment, right? We need a policy. We really encourage people to report. Again, we've got these non-retaliation prohibitions on retaliation to encourage reporting. And if someone is ever uncomfortable, like reporting to a manager, reporting to HR, or whatever the policy provides, you can always report to the EEOC. If a colleague has been harassed, again, we say first, turn to policy. We also recommend if you see something, say something. Like, aren't there so many scenarios in which we say this, right? So be an ally. Sometimes the person who's experiencing the negative impact is not comfortable for very reasonable reasons to report. So assist in any way that you can to assist them with policy and through the process. We also talk about intervention, that if you see really bullying behavior or harassing behavior, where appropriate and where you're comfortable, intervening in that behavior can be very helpful. Whether that is directly confronting the behavior, delegating it to someone else, like asking a manager to please intervene, documenting the behavior is also very helpful. If you are a supervisor, again, first and foremost, policy is so important. Have policy, procedures, and processes for navigating any kind of sexually harassing or just generally discriminatory behavior. Supervisors, we ask that they help empower bystanders, empower colleagues to make sure that they feel comfortable following policy. Conducting a climate survey is always a very good idea, and we also speak to the importance of modeling expectations and behavior. I provided a bunch of resources that could be helpful regarding what we've discussed today. So turning to the ICRC and EEOC can be very, very helpful. The National Conference of State Legislatures has a really helpful document on sexual harassment in the workplace that you could find helpful. The AAUW has some information. The Institute for Women's Policy Research and RAIN also have important resources if you ever find yourself navigating concerns related to sexual harassment in the workplace. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to any questions, comments, or concerns that the board may have regarding sexual harassment. There's a lot of material in a short period of time. I welcome your thoughts and your feedback. I am also of the understanding that you all take an annual training in sexual harassment, so I'm assuming that much of this material was not new to you, but rather a refresher. Any questions? Is it just too late in the day for questions?
Well,
Yes, sir.
Any questions? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
What we're discussing is we're a little ahead of time, but we think that other things need to probably wait till tomorrow. So this meeting of the Board of Regents is adjourned.